10 p.m. report.
At a drug bust in Minneapolis tonight, authorities confiscate our cameras and the Star and Tribune, bringing up questions about freedom of the press.
And a plane crash kills 4 in Illinois, the victims believed to be from Minnesota.
The 10 p.m. report is coming up next. You are watching WCCO Television, Minneapolis, St. Paul. This is the 10 p.m. report.
Good evening, everyone. A drug bust tonight in Minneapolis has turned into an issue of freedom of the press.
Authorities confiscated the cameras of both the Minneapolis Star and Tribune and WCCO Television at the scene of that drug bust. Federal officials felt the pictures would threaten undercover identities of some of their agents. Media organizations have covered drug busts in the past, but of all the people we checked with tonight in the Twin Cities, including in our own newsroom, no one can remember the media property being confiscated while gathering news. Cindy Hilger has the story. Using video originally confiscated, but used after authorities agreed to what video we could show.
The drug bust happened outside this convenience store in North Minneapolis. Local media heard about it over police scanners in their newsrooms. Photographers from WCCO and the Minneapolis Star and Tribune arrived on the scene and began taking pictures of the arrests. FBI agents watched them and then approached the newspaper photographer and reportedly told him to turn over his film or face arrest.
Take the film out of camera. We got undercover guys here. You don't need to have that film. Don't push it any further, okay?
I identified myself as, a member of a real live news organization and told them that, we had dealt with these situations before and that I was, I understood what was going on. And he still wanted the film, yeah.
The photographer says the agents were concerned that photos of undercover officers would be printed in tomorrow's paper. After the newspaper photographer turned over his camera, the agent approached WCCO's.
Jail, too.
I'm on the public street. What am I doing wrong?
You're going to jail.
What am I doing wrong? I'm on the public street.
Give up the camera, you're going to jail.
All he had to do was ask me if they didn't want their plainclothesmen to be identified, and that's no problem. I'm not out to hurt anyone or expose anyone to any harm.
Both photographers say they've never been forced to turn over their equipment before.
Usually in the case of law enforcement people, if they are undercover and they know you're from a news organization, they, let you know what the problems are, what the considerations are.
Just before 9 tonight, the U.S. Attorney's Office returned the tape with the stipulation that attorneys could watch as it was being edited. They say FBI agents took it to make sure undercover officers weren't identified so they could ensure their safety. Cindy Hilger, WCCO Television News, Minneapolis.
We should mention that in the past, we have gone along with requests not to show the faces of undercover agents. It is standard practice. In fact, we have never violated the rule. But authorities told me tonight that other media organizations have violated it, and that's why they were so careful tonight. Now, with us is our photographer, Gary Feblowitz, whose camera was confiscated tonight. First time it's ever happened to you?
First time it's ever happened to me.
How many times were you told prior to the moment the individual approached you and said, you're going to jail if you don't give me your camera? How many times did he tell you that there were undercover agents involved, people whose identity needed protection?
I was never told that there were undercover agents involved, up until the point where they came and took the camera from me.
Had you been told that there were undercover agents involved, somebody approached you and say, just a moment now, we've got some people under here who could be in a terrible situation if you show their pictures tomorrow or tonight on the news, what would you have done?
If they had told me so, I would have said fine. I would have promised them that I wouldn't have showed any faces, and that's the way it would have been edited. Like I said earlier, I'm not out to harm anyone or put anyone in danger. I'm just out there to record news events, and if they didn't want their stumps to be on, then that would have been the way it would have been shown.
Now, I want to argue the devil's advocacy point of view, if I may. The police officers were in the middle of a situation going down, as they say. They had 2 fugitives. They had a third party there. They thought they were armed and dangerous. Undercover officers. These individuals sounded concerned that maybe some of their fellow officers would be in danger of being exposed to violence if their pictures were taken. Did they act excited in that way?
Well, obviously they were excited. There was a lot of activity. There were a lot of people around, a lot of officers. So I think that that was definitely one of their concerns. I think the only person in danger in that setup was myself, and that's part of the job of being a news photographer.
Yeah.
Gary, what were your thoughts and feelings during the time that your camera was being taken, you were being threatened with arrest?
Well, I felt sort of violated. I wasn't sure of my rights, and I wasn't sure that they could take it. I certainly didn't think they were able to. They certainly did not give me a legitimate reason why, but they told me if I didn't give it up, I was to be arrested. So I didn't have much choice.
All right, Gary, thank you. Lost in the shuffle here, the actual arrest. 3 people taken into custody on this cocaine-related bust.
And we might pass along, too, that both media organizations have their attorneys working on this incident, and they're trying to decide what action they could take in response. Yes. In another major drug bust, Minneapolis authorities arrested 2 men and confiscated more than $100,000 worth of cocaine. In custody, 29-year-old Raul Damian Lopez and 33-year-old Martine Alfred R.M.
No television, Minneapolis, St. Paul.
The long arm of the law reached out and touched one of our own last night.
It also touched off a controversy that won't be settled for some time to come. What started out as a routine drug bust in North Minneapolis turned into a confrontation between authorities and a couple of media photographers. Police confiscated their gear and threatened the men behind the cameras with arrest.
I'm on the public street. What am I doing wrong?
You're going to jail.
What am I doing wrong? I'm on the public street.
Give up the camera, you're going to jail.
You know, all he had to do was ask me that they didn't want their plainclothesmen to be identified, and that's no problem. I'm not out to hurt anyone or expose anyone to any harm.
Which side was really protecting the public interest? We'll look into that question next on Newsday.
From WCCO Television, a new kind of news program. Newsday with Marcia Fleur and Dave Nimmer.
Good afternoon, everyone. On this Newsday, we are going to delve into a disturbing issue to those of us who are in the media.
Well, it ought to be a disturbing issue to everyone. Did federal drug agents have the right to confiscate our gear during a drug raid last night? The fact that they did so and stood over our news editors while the story was put together raises serious questions about your rights to information and our rights to tell you.
We'll be talking to a newsroom manager who spent last night trying to get our tape released.
And we'll also look into take an in-depth look at a lengthy labor dispute in northern Minnesota. It raises issues which may affect your job. And we'll talk with spokesmen on either side of that issue. But first, we'll get to today's news headlines with Don Shelby. Don?
What? Thanks, Don.
During the Minneapolis drug bust last night, authorities and the news media clashed over coverage.
The FBI confiscated cameras, videotape, and film from 2 photographers and threatened to arrest both of them. It is one of the few times in Minnesota that such action has been taken against journalists, and it raises some serious questions about freedom of the press. The dispute is today's story behind the story.
It started with a simple police radio call. Arrest in progress.
4525 in here.
Authorities even gave the address. When photographers from WCCO Television and the Minneapolis Star and Tribune arrived, they started taking pictures of the arrests. All routine to that point. Routine until FBI agents approached the Strib photographer, Tom Sweeney, and reportedly told him to turn over his film or face arrest. After he gave his camera to agents, they turned their attention to WCCO photographer Gary Feblowitz.
I'm on the public street. What am I doing wrong?
You're going to jail.
What am I doing wrong? I'm on the public street.
Give up the camera, you're going to jail.
You know, all he had to do was ask me that they didn't want their plainclothesmen to be identified, and that's no problem. I'm not out to hurt anyone or expose anyone to any harm.
Feblowitz turned over the camera and the tape to the FBI. It wasn't returned until an hour before the 10 p.m. newscast, and then only with the caveat that agents and lawyers could be present when the tape was edited. The tape was, in fact, altered at the insistence of the U.S. Attorney's Office, presumably to protect the identity of undercover police from several agencies. In this case, 2 values clashed: the authorities to protect their agents, and the media's to avoid, in effect, government censorship. In fact, the media and the Minneapolis police have worked together often on arrests of these sorts, and worked together well.
With the news media in the Twin Cities, the WCCO in particular, we've had a pretty good trust relationship, and they've been responsible. So they're treated like combat correspondents. They have access to the scene, they know the limits, and they follow them pretty closely. And for that reason, we pretty much ignored them. If something sensitive develops, we go right to that person and make sure that our wishes, our desires, and in fact our demands are known to them, and it's worked out pretty well.
In the cases Lutz is talking about, the media were asked to be self-censors, and they were. Last night, they were not trusted to make the right decision. The government did it for them.
The law enforcement officers going into the newsroom and supervising the editing of the film is quite shocking to me.
We invited federal authorities to discuss the issue with us today on Newsday, but they declined. WCCO TV assignment editor Doug Stone joins us to talk about why this issue is important to journalists and should be important to most of us. Welcome to the show, Doug.
Thank you.
You know, Doug, why was it such a fuss anyway? They took the tape, they took the camera, they did bring it back. Why would there be any fuss to begin with? Why aftermath now?
Well, they brought it back after they forced us basically with a gun to our head to, not literally, but with a gun to our head to make an agreement by which they would come in and watch us edit it so that we wouldn't show any undercover agents. And it's an untenable position. We were in an untenable position. We either could give up the tape completely and not have videotape and basically not have much of a story, or accept the compromise which they forced on us. Normally we don't negotiate for those, but...
Talk about that. You've been talking about that in the newsroom for most of the day. The compromise is the unusual situation where a federal attorney or an agent is looking over the shoulder of a tape editor and, in fact, making decisions saying, no, you can't use that one. How'd that make you feel?
It made me feel terrible. I had to walk out of the room. I was almost sick. It's never happened before, either at the newspaper here or at the newspapers or at this TV station, and that they would actually supervise the editing.
You struck the bargain. Why?
I struck the bargain because basically I had two choices. One, not have the tape and basically not have a story, or get the tape and make a compromise which in effect did not hurt us in the story. We gave up nothing that we wouldn't have shown anyway. We never show undercover agents' pictures.
But didn't you lose the issue? If you said, give us our tape back, it's our tape, you didn't have a warrant for it, you have no right to censor us, then we can go to court. But by holding hands with the feds last night, didn't you really give up your right to complain? And if you did, what do we do the next time?
Well, I don't think we gave up our right to complain. I think we're in the business of airing news, broadcasting news, and that was what I wanted, the tape in order to broadcast. We're not in the business of litigation or fighting things, and so I don't think we gave up the court fight at all. The next time, I hope there isn't a next time, we're going to try to work out an agreement with the U.S. Attorney and the FBI so this doesn't happen again. It's an unconscionable thing to happen, for them to do that, and I hope we don't have to face the situation again.
And you're going to meet tomorrow morning?
Tomorrow morning.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thanks very
thank
much,
you.
Doug, for coming on. Coming up, strikes and layoffs have taken their toll on the iron range.
Miners are used to being out of work at Christmas time, but this year a dispute rages in Mountain Iron that is already more